Hello everyone and welcome back to another video from Oats. And this time we'll be looking at building actual web apps using Oats. And for our first lesson, we're going to look at building a very simple web app that will teach us a few concepts about fragments, routing, and default routes in Oats. Now, what you're going to achieve at the end of, we have two lessons. We'll have this first lesson where we look at this, and then the second lesson where we look at reactivity and data management. And what we'll achieve with the second video will be this view right here, or this web app, where we'll have two fragments. One where we're able to get a random cut based on HTTP status code. There's an API that uses the HTTP status code to give us different cut images. And then we'll have the movies fragment, where we'll be able to search for a movie and then find it. So as a showcase, once everything will be done with the second video after the video after this one, we will be able to click on Meow. You can see it loads for us a new cut image based on HTTP status code. You can see we'll also have a loading view and everything. So this is fully wired with reactivity and data management. When you come to movies, you can search for movie by title. Let's say I look for author. You can see the loading screen, and then you have the movies listed for us. You can look for Avengers. Sorry, wrong movie. Avengers. There we go. So this is what we're going to fully implement by the second video. But for today's lesson, we're gonna shut down this. Today's lesson, we'll just do reactivity. Sorry, we'll only do fragments and routing and default routes. And for that, all that means is we won't be able to use the APIs and load our views based on what the API is returning, but we'll be able to set up our fragments and understand what's going on. As far as Oats' rendering of fragments is concerned and routing. Now I'll just refresh this. You can see I have my fragments set up and search for a movie. We have HTTP cuts that also won't work, but you have our fragments set up. Now that's what you're going to do today. Now I've written about this. The article is available at dev.2. There'll be a link to the article in the description, and I'll encourage you to have that opened in a separate tab because there are bits of the code, especially the HTML and the CSS for the views, which I prefer to copy than just write from scratch during the video, because number one, that will save us time. Number two, more importantly, is it won't have any adverse effect in how you understand Oats, because Oats has no control or command in how you specify your views in terms of how you simply write HTML, how you do your styling in terms of CSS. So basically, the basic knowledge that you have with, of HTML and CSS will carry on to Oats with no problem whatsoever. Now, I'll get right into it. So, I've already explained what you're going to achieve. So what you're going to do first is to set up a project and environment. And to do that, I'll just exit this. And then I'll just open my terminal again. And you're going to do everything in this code along folder. So you can create your own folder for that. And like this, I'll just navigate to that folder. And then I'm going to set up my project environment for OTC. And to do that, it's as simple as running this command npx on OTC CLI. What this will do is that it will use the OTC CLI to set up a startup project environment that also includes a starter project. So what you just have to do is delete the files that you don't need, edit a few files, and just get started and just start writing your OTC web app immediately. Just OTC CLI. We got to run, confirm with the Y that we want to install it in this directory. So that it will install dependencies now, and then we'll be able to start writing our project. Now, our project has successfully been, an OT project has successfully been set up in our directory. And if you look at it right now, it's no longer empty. We have a node modules folder, we have a proxy server folder, a source folder, webpack configs folder, and a couple of other files here, like a JS config file and all that. So because of automation intelligence just picks on everything nicely, I'm going to reload my window. Good. Now, just make sure types are inferred correctly after this JS config.json file has been loaded with the OTC CLI. Now, what you're going to do next is, after you've set up, you're going to delete the files that you don't need. So the first thing will be that we'll navigate to index assets, and then we delete all files under that folder. So we'll go to source, app, index assets. We do not need these two files. The recycle bin. And we also navigate to app, source app fragments, and we'll delete the about and home folders. These are basically the folders for the about fragment and the home fragment that we have in the starter project that can run after installing OTC using the CLI. I'll just delete this. I'll just go away. So what you're going to do next is that you're going to create the cut and movies fragments. And basically we'll be creating their folders because we'd like to structure our development, our code nicely. So each fragment is housed in its own folder with its own files, the style files, the view files, the asset files, and the script files. Now, I'm going to go to the cut fragment folder. We're going to create it. So we're going in the fragments folder, I'm going to create a new subfolder and call it HTTP cuts. Now, right here, I create a new folder and call it HTTP cuts. Also, I create another folder, call it movies. So here, we will have all the source files for HTTP cuts fragment, and then inside the movies folder is where we'll have all our source files for the movies fragment. And what we'll do next is that we'll create a couple of subfolders inside here. We'll have views, styles, assets, and scripts. Views folder, script, assets, and styles. Now, there's something that I need you to take note of, specifically when it comes to naming the assets folder. This is quite important because when it comes to our webpack configuration, come to webpack configs OTC and you come to main and we open this configuration file. This is basically where we've set up our loaders. And what's happening here? What's happening here is that we have our handlebars loader, which is responsible for loading our handlebars files, specifically in OTC's case with the .hbs extension. Now, we have this directive right here, inlet requires assets. And what this means is that when our handlebars loader encounters just the standard image tag with the source provided. We have that provided as assets.my file.j. What the handlebars loader will do is that it will replace this with an inline require statement, and that will further instruct Webpack to now use the appropriate asset loader for my file.jpg, of which that, you look at this directive right here, you have the .jpg extension will be loaded by the asset/resource loader, which comes inbuilt with Webpack 5. If you want to use Webpack lower than 5, you will have then to configure the right loader right here. But for Webpack 5, you have your asset/resource. Now, basically, because you've provided our directive here for inlet requires to be any asset that is in the /assets folder, if we were to use a different folder name right here, if we were to change this to, let's say, images. So let's say if we had an image tag in our handlebars template, we'd have it in specified like that. We'll have to update this, change that to, and provide a similar value, so that at the end of the day, when our code is being bundled, handlebars loader will use will replace this with a require statement, and the right loader will be used. Failure to do that, if you just leave this as assets, this will bring up an error, and we'd like to avoid that. So if you want to use, if you're using the base configuration for Oats, make sure your asset files are in the assets folder. If you want to use a different folder, choose the folder, choose the name that you'll have for those folders, and then make sure you update this part of the configuration. Now, we can just do the same for create similar folders for movies, assets, scripts, styles, and we'll have views. And also this configuration with assets only affects the handlebars loader. So in case you're going to use a different templating engine, your mileage will vary. So ensure you're aware of how it handles assets provided inline within the template, and if there's any special configuration that you have to provide for it. But for handlebars, what I've mentioned applies. For handlebars using handlebars loader, what I've mentioned applies. Now, with our subfolder setup, go back to HTTP cards fragment. What we're going to do next is to write the source code for the HTTP cards fragment. So we'll have to create its source file first. And to do that, we'll get inside the scripts folder and create a file with this name, HTTP cards main fragment.js. So we'll come into the scripts folder. That is it. That's main fragment. Yes, create a file. And then now we're going to write this code right here. So the first thing that we'll do, which is a personal preference, is that we're going to instruct VS Code to have TypeScript check our file for just strict type checking, which is good practice. And then what we're going to do next is that we're going to import styles. So we're going to import a file that we're going to create shortly. That file will be inside styles, called http cuts.css. This will basically contain the styling for our views that will be rendered by the HTTP cuts main fragment. So just come here, styles, here that file, HTTP cuts.css, and we'll add its source code shortly. Now we'll just stick to our source file, And then now we have these two inputs right here that we'll look at when we're understanding what's happening here, where we're creating a HTTP cats main fragment class. So when OTC is rendering its view, so like in this case, you have right here, the fragment is the core view system for OTC. And how OTC does it is that its core is written in object-oriented programming, meaning you're going to use classes to define our fragments and run our code, our fragment code. And what OTC will do is when you route to, let's say in our case here, when you route to movies, OTC will understand that it needs to render the movies fragment or fragments. Now it will create instances of this fragment and then call the specific methods that are needed to render the view and set up the fragment to run operate as its logic. Now, so the first thing they're going to do is to create this class, and it's going to extend an inbuilt class that's called the app main fragment. So let's just do that now. Yeah, just add a comment. Put else. Then I will have class HTTP main fragment extends app fragment. Now this is now going to be picked up immediately. So we just add its import app main fragment from OTC fragments app main fragment. Now you notice that inside our fragments folder, the internal fragments folder for OTC, there's an app main fragment, there's an app child fragment. Now the app main fragment is where view rendering starts for a route. So in our example, like here, this has been rendered from the main fragment. But in case I had other nested views within that, let's say I had movies / category or something of that sort, and the views being rendered for that are different, but they're all under the main movies fragment. We'll have those under the child fragment. But in our case, because we're only going to render one main view, we'll extend the app main fragment. We'll look at the app child fragment later when we're looking at fragments in a more advanced way. So with that done, now we've find our class HTTP cats main fragment. We're going to override an internal method for app main fragment. It's also then app child fragment because app child fragment extends app main fragment. So we're going to extend this method called initialize view. And what this method is for is that whenever it's called, what is requesting for the view that it should render for the provided fragment. And it allows you to source, you can see it as an async before it. It allows you to source this view either directly or via network. And then once you have it, you're going to call this function, which will now pass the callback. There's a callback that is passed to this function, to the initialize view function, by the builder that is responsible for building our fragment. And once you've obtained your view, you call this method right here, pass to it the callback and your UI template. And your UI template now is as a HTML string after you've sourced it in whatever way you want to source it. Now, I'm going to override that method with async view callback, and we're just going to type this using JS docs because you're writing a code in vanilla JavaScript. So just have a type app main fragment initialize that will now type give our callback, understand the type for callback correctly. And then now what you're going to do is that you're going to get our view, of which in our case, we're not going to do any form of network retrieval. We're going to use a 100-bus template because that allows us to have our view file separate and just have that and have just a better project structure overall. So we're going to have our template is equals to require. We're going to require our handlebars template file. We're going to be provided as view http fragment yes. And then now, what handlebars loader will do whenever we get this, when we have this require statement right here, Webpack will understand that we have a .hbs file that's supposed to be loaded as per the configuration. Have here that will be handled by the handlebars loader. Now the handlebars loader will emit a JS function. And that JS function, when we call that function, that will now emit our final view as a HTML string. And since and with the handlebars, we can, if you have any data that you wanted to template to that view, we can pass in our data as well. But in our case, we won't have any data, so we're going to leave that as is. Now, what you're going to do next is we will create this file. Let me make sure we just have it. Of HTTP fragment. Yes, that file in place. You can reference it well. This error usually doesn't just go away. We'll just put a TS expect error directive here to just make sure our file is clear. So I'll try and refresh the window again. So have everything coming correctly. But yeah, this was not showing well. That's why I refreshed the window. I reloaded the window so that just this directive works well. In your case, you just have to do it once, and you never have to do it again. Whenever it's because we just loaded our project and started working on it. The windows never refreshed, so that IntelliSense can just, and the language server can just put everything together. Now, once we have our UI template, which is now been delivered as a string, we need to pass that now back to our building process so that this will finally be rendered on the browser. So to do that, you're going to call the function, internal function, on view init success. And this takes two arguments. One is the UI as a string, UI template, and then the builder callback, which is basically the same callback that was passed to this function. So by doing this, by just doing this will get us our view, our fragment, and pass it on to Oats, continue the rendering process. We don't have to deal with attaching this to the DOM or removing it to the DOM even when the fragment is being cleaned up. This is all you have to do to provide a view. Now, the only thing that is left is now wrapping our fragment in a builder. And the reason for that is Oats is going to create an instance of our fragments when they need to be rendered. Now, instead of exporting our excuse me, instead of importing our fragment, we're going to instead create a fragment builder. That's main fragment builder by just creating a constant, and we're going to assign this to an instance of an app fragment builder. Now, the app fragment builder is the class that is in charge of emitting instances of a fragment that are needed for given route. So what you always give Oats is the builder, and then now the builder will emit instances of a fragment when they need to be rendered. Now, in our case, the constructor is expecting the first argument as the class of our fragment, so that will be main fragment, and then the final argument expects our constructor arguments, of which in our case, if it is an object, we're going to give it an object and provide a view ID. This view ID is going to be called that's name. Now, let's talk about these constructor arguments, specifically view ID. There's so many other constructor arguments that we'll look at down the pipeline, but for now, let's focus on view ID. Now, to illustrate why view ID is important, I'll open the project that you have already, and I'm going to inspect it. Now, I want you to look at the markup right inside the main fragment element. When I navigate to HTTP cards, you can see that this markup is updated, and that is done by Oats. And you can see just under main fragment, you have a div that has the ID HTTP cards main. And this is exactly the view ID that you provide here. Now, what Oats is doing is that so that it's able to manage views for you, your fragment views for you automatically, it wraps your view in a container element. In our case, it's a div, but as per Oats will put it in a div. And inside that div with the ID that provide here as the view ID is where now we'll have our actual fragment views. And so when this is what will this is basically what will provide us our UI template right here, and then Otsy will wrap it inside this div and then place that inside the main fragment, because this is extending the main fragment, so it's expecting that we are rendering to the main fragment, of which can only have one main fragment. And then in case you had child fragments inside here, within here, we'd have our child fragments loaded within the child fragment elements. But we'll look at that later. For now, that's what what you need to understand is that's what the view ID is for, and that's the most important constructor argument we need to provide. Now, this error that you have is just an internal typing error. You don't need to worry about it, but you can just provide the TS expect error directive, and that will go away. Now, with all this done, we are going to export not our main fragment class, but instead our builder. That's main fragment builder. And that's all that we need to do for our main fragment, our HTTP cards main fragment. This is done. Now, I'm scrolling over this because it just explains what I've explained to you, but it's how I'd written it in the article. Now we've covered all this. Now what's left for us to do is, in our fragment, we had our view right here, HTTP cards fragment.hbs, which is supposed to now provide the view for the fragment. Now we're going to add its code. It's just something very simple. It's just a section, the header. I'm just going to copy and paste that. This is just a section, the header, h1, and then a button. Nothing fancy here, nothing different. It's just HTML syntax. And that's because handlebars is, you can call it a superset of HTML, in that all your HTML syntax and all your HTML functionalities, how you write HTML is basically how you can write any handlebars file or template file. The only difference is now handlebars now allows you to bind data to your views directly, something close to what we see with other templating syntaxes like with JSX. So you just use our curly braces, and then let's say call this my data. And in our case here, if let's say we had to template something, we'd use require and then call it, because this will be resolved into a function, and then just pass the value of my data. Okay, that was, let's say, 2 cuts. So this, when we render here, this will pass my data as 2 cuts. So this will be resolved to 2 cuts. My data will be resolved to 2 cuts, but we're not going to use that here. Syntax is just basic HTML. There's nothing else different there. This to, then yeah, the file is okay, and you've put in the markup for fragment. Now we're going to provide the styling. Nothing fancy here, your regular CSS, because this is an OT specific video. I'm not going to go through any of this. This is just regular CSS. If you want to copy it, you can just pause the video right here and copy the content that you have there, but I'd advise you instead you just get it directly from the article. Link is in the description. Just open it in a new tab and just copy this code right here. It's the same thing. So I'll save this file, and then now what I want us to do is to just run this one fragment, the HTTP cuts fragment, before we implement the movies fragment, because we can just do that. Now, what we'll do is we'll implement our app root view for our root view. And what our root view is, if let's say you haven't come from our previous videos, is basically the bit of our app that never changes. Now, let me inspect this. Let me inspect the web app that you have again. You'll notice that you have an approach tag. We have body, and then inside the body you have an approach tag. And inside the approach tag, you can see we have our nav, of which our navigation will never change. When I'm navigating to movies, when I'm navigating to HTTP cards, I don't need to re-render our navigation. There's no need for that. And then now we have our main fragment where we have actual views that will be changing based on navigation. Now, what you're going to do is to implement this bit, the uproot and the nav, which is going to provide its markup. And you can do this in 2 ways. You can either provide it as a template when you are starting your Oats app, or an easier way to do it, or an alternative way to do it, is to just provide it in your server file, or which can be like your index.html file, or in our case, this home.sv.hps file, which is what basically will be provided by the server to the browser. It will contain our script, so it will have our script and everything else that basically will be loaded from the server via our browser. And yeah, just putting it in there directly just is the same thing as providing it right here in our index.js file. It's just the same thing. Oats will take either. So we'll provide that markup right here. What we'll do is instead of copying, I'll just show you what we'll just code along, and so that you can understand the core bits of it on approach for our root view. So our root view starts with the approach tag, and then inside there you can put any of your views that will never change. So in our case, we'll have our navbar. I'll just copy now that bit of code, because there's nothing too special about it as far as Oats is concerned, except for just 2 things that I'll go over. So I'll copy the markup for our nav. This is just create our navbar, which is this one right here. This one right here. And then the only thing special about our nav is that we have links that the user clicks on, and that navigates them through the web app. Now, those links have special selectors that will allow Oats to target them and update them so that you're able to know which link is active and have Oats automatically route or navigate the app for you. Now, Oats allows you for your navigation to either have A tags or you can have this as buttons, just a button. And either will work as long as you'll see how we'll do it as long as you tell it which selector your navigation link or button is using. And then it will deal with all the boilerplate of hooking up the listeners, auto navigating for you, and telling you which navigation link or button is active. So we leave this as an A tag as it was. And now the final thing that we need to put in our approach is this main fragment tag. Now we only provide one main fragment tag. And basically, this is now where route standard views will be shown. I've illustrated that already. You can see here. Just inspect again. Inside the main fragment, just pay attention to this. As I navigate, that's where the actual markup that's actually where the dynamic views are shown based on routing. And you only for you when specifying your root field, you only provide one main fragment tag. OTC requires only one main fragment. But you can have multiple child fragments, just stick with them. Child fragment, we just specify by them as child fragment. That's it, and nothing special about them. But we'll look at child fragments later in a more advanced video. For now, this is all that you need to know. The only thing that we'll do for uproot is that as far as our markup was concerned, we had this ID here, my app, and just give it that ID. You're free to use any ID that you want. OTC doesn't restrict you on that. Now, with that completed, now we've covered we've specified our uproot view. We have these unique IDs that are set up, so we just have to style them, and we'll go to our styles, index.css, and there are these directives that are there originally for the starter app that you get in the starter project, the starter app that you get in the starter project using the CLI. So we'll replace that with this. So go to the article, go to this point where you're opening the index.css file and copy this code. You don't have to write all of it. Just copy this. It's just styling unique to the web app that you're creating. So I'll copy that and save this file. The directives that are that we carry over from the core OT setup or project setup is this. This allows us, what this does, what this directive right here does, the reason why we need it is if in case we had, let's go to our approach and our navigation right here, in case our links were, we had to mark them up differently. So let's say we had A here, and then you had a span, and then it had something, and then let's say it had the image tag right there. The links looked different and they needed to be marked up differently. The thing is, OTC automatically intercepts clicks on the A tag. But if the user was to click on the actual link, there are elements nested within. There's the span element, there's the image element that might actually intercept the actual click. Now, instead of having a complex mechanism of trying to figure out the bubbling and see whether that bubble is back to an A as the parent or as the parent element of the click event, this directive right here just blocks any form of clicks from being intercepted by your inner elements or the A tag. Now, that ensures that Oats sees automatic perception of clicks on the A tag and how it automatically sets up navigation for your web app is not interfered with. But in case you want to change that behavior, you can just provide an attribute, click override, and change that to false, and then we'll be able to after point events there. Now, always ensure you carry over this styling for all your OTC projects. It will help you deal with those quirks, especially if you want to do something fancy or unique with your with how you mark up your links. Now, the rest has nothing special except for here, and I'll explain that shortly. We'll come back to this shortly. Now we have our index.css file set. The next thing that you're going to do is implement index.js. Now our starter project already had an index.js file for us, and it's this one right here. And the index.js file is basically where OTC, the OTC web app starts. The moment the script index.js is loaded in your browser, this is where the OT web app is initiated. We call the init app function, which is the wrapper function that now calls the approach.initApp method, which now initializes OT, and OT is now able to run in your browser. There are specific arguments that you pass to it. If you're not aware of each and what they do, you can look at the video about starting an OT app. I'd explained what each of these arguments are for. But this setup will mostly never change. There's nothing you ever have to modify here for this code specifically. What we just change for our case is we're going to change a style import from index responsive to index.css. And that means we will need the index responsive.css file. So we'll delete that. And now we're going to save our index.js file, importing now only index.css for styling. And then the other things that we're now going to change or edit that came from our starter project will be now the app routing info and the app main info. Now let's start with the app routing info. The app routing info is basically, or what we get from this class, from this file, is basically the routing information that OTC will use to navigate our app, to actually navigate our app, to actually render the views that are needed for every route of the web app. Now, for instance, in our starter project, we had the root path or the home path and the about. And OTC had the directive that for the root, this home path, it had to render the fragment that is emitted by the home main fragment builder. And for the about, it had to render the fragment that is emitted by the about main fragment builder. Now, for our case, that's obviously going to be different. Now we're going to delete these imports for home main fragment builder and about main fragment builder because we delete those and we don't need them. And for our routes, we're going to have two routes. We're going to have the HTTP cuts route, which is the root path, and we're going to have the movies route, which is the slash movies route. Now, because we want to test our HTTP cuts route, we're going to start with just the root path, which is the one that will render our HTTP cuts fragment. And for that, we're going to use the H as the target or the main fragment, quote unquote, where our view rendering will start. We'll specify the HTTP cuts main fragment builder. So that will tell OTC for this root path, start your view rendering from the fragment emitted by HTTP cuts main fragment builder, which is our HTTP cuts main fragment, and that will essentially load this view right here. And now we'll remove this second routing info because we don't need that for now. And then we'll save this file. Now, The next thing that we'll implement is the app main nav info. And now what this gives us, we have its reference right here. I'll just click on that document in a separate, in a new tab. Now, what this gives Oats is navigation information that will allow it to automatically wire your navigation links or buttons within the app for two purposes. Number one, handle for you the boilerplate that sets up the click event listeners and actual routing or navigation for your app. And number two, to automatically tell you which navigation link or button is active. Now, in our case, only about the home link is also invalid, but now we're going to change home link to HTTP cats link. And this is for the selector value. And this is how that ties to what we had here, home.svg.js. We had our markup for the navigation, and we had for our root path, we had this link right here, this a tag, and it has this class selector, HTTP cat link. It can be any name. OTC doesn't restrict the name that you use. But as long as it's a class selector that you're going to provide here, of that as HTTP cats link. And now, whenever OT will, number one, intercept clicks on this link automatically for us. Number two, it will understand that that's a navigation link it needs to navigate, and it navigates to this default route. Though when you're using a tags, it will look at the href directly. But if this was a button, because buttons don't have this, it will now look at the default route instead. But still, the concept is the same. And this is clicked, it will navigate us to the default route. And whenever the app is being navigated, if the route starts with the base active route, OT will always mark the navigation link or button with this selector as the currently active one. So let's do that practically. Let's save this file. And then now I'll run our project so that we see how everything has come together, because now we've provided as far as our index.js file is concerned, and the main things that we need to edit are concerned, we have edited our styling, because we're putting a new styling that styles our uproot basically. And then we have changed our app routing info to now fit what our web app needs, and we have changed our app main nav info to fit what our web app needs. Now everything has been put together. Our fragment now is now linked to routing through the app routing info, and we have now our navigation working correctly because of the app main nav info that you provided. What you're going to do next, with everything put together, is just run npm run dev to now see whether the project will work and see what we have so far. Now we've compiled successfully. That means we haven't had any issues as far as Webpack is concerned, and our file structures and everything. So I'll just run this in a separate tab so that we have good reference and reference. There we go. Now, what has happened is we've loaded our web app. It has gotten to the browser. Our routing info specified that for our root path, we'll load the view that is will render the fragment that is emitted by the HTTP cats main fragment builder, which is a HTTP cats main fragment that emitted the view rendered provided by this handlebars template, and that is now after Oats made its calls for the fragment instance. That's what was bound right here. If you notice, if I click on movies, I don't get anything because there is no routing info that exists for the path movies. And that's what you're going to do next. That's what you're going to fix. But up to this point, that's it. You've set up a fragment, you've set up routing, and you've set up navigation, and you have an actual OC web app running. Now, to just illustrate what you have with our home link, our main navigation info, and what it does, to just completely illustrate. Let me comment this out and save that, and you'll observe something. Our HTTP cards, this bit, is no longer styled. And what that means is OT was previously, because you'd given it its selector, OT was previously, let me save this, OT was previously able to target it, and then what it was changing as far as this navigation link being active, what it was updating about it was this attribute right here, navigation state active. And that is why in our styling, in our index.css, we had this right here. Remember, from our markup, we also have nav link as a class selector for our links, for all our links. And because OC will add the attribute navigation state and provide that as active or inactive, we can be able to update the style of our navigation links based on which are active as per OT's determination. And OT will determine that based on our main navigation info. I hope that has finally how that works has finally come together and made sense for you, and why and how now everything works. Now we have our fragment in our HTTP card fragment, everything is working. Now let's wire our second fragment and have that bit of our web app completed. Now we'll now implement our movies fragment. We'll now just come to fragments, minimize the HTTP card fragment, open the movies fragment, create our source file. We'll have the movies underscore main fragment with JS file, so we'll just create that. And inside here, we just do the same thing that we did previously of that yes check directive, import our styles, which will be from the movie.css file. And the styles folder, movies.css. Let's just create this file, and then we'll implement it later. So we have movies.css, and then we're now going to create our fragment class, which will be the movies main fragment. This main fragment extends main fragment, and import our main fragment class. Main fragment from Oats fragment. Sorry, main fragment. And then we'll have our initialize view. We'll override the initialize view method of that callback. Specify its typing just to make sure thing is working. We have IntelliSense working correctly for us. Just help. But fragment. Then right here, we get our UI template. We're going to require this view right here, which will be our handle pass template for the movies fragment. Just require views movies fragment. Yes. And then finally, now that you have our view, you're going to call one init view success. On view init success. Sorry. View init success. And pass in our UI template. And build a callback. Then we just provide the yes expect error directive here. But make sure you've implemented this file right here. So we've created this file to move these fragment.hbs file that is under the views subfolder inside the movies fragment folder. We'll implement its markup shortly. And then with that completed, now we get our builder instance. Now that is the movies and fragment builder. That take the instance of app builder. And we'll pass in our movies main fragment. View IP as movies main fragment. And now we'll export builder. Movies main fragment builder. We're going to import this with fragment builder. What's the fragments builder app fragment builder? Now everything should be okay. Now the only thing that is left is to implement or write the markup for our view for the movies main fragment. So you just copy what you have in the article. You can just copy it directly. Just save yourself a bit of time because there's nothing fancy about it. It just looks like regular HTML. And then finally, we'll copy the styling. Copy it directly from the article. Go to our movies.css file, paste it, save that. And then finally, because you've set up a new fragment, we have written the source files for our new fragment, we'll want to update our app routing info so that now Oats can route to our new route and render the right view. So we're going to add a new directive. We're going to go to app routing info.js, add a new routing info, an object to specify route. And our route in this case will be movies. Then our target, where our rendering will basically begin, will be the movies main fragment builder. And then finally, nested child fragments will be null because we don't have any nested views that we want to render as their own components. So what we're going to do is to import our movies main fragment builder. All that was import movies and fragment user. Fragments, movies, scripts, movies. Now, with our app routing info specified, let's save our file in our terminal. And now the other thing that we're going to update is our app main nav info. And for this, we're going to add our selector for the movies, specify the default route, and specify the route that should be active. It should be marked as active. Now, add a new nav info selector. Basically, what you have here, this video, this movies link. Now, at this point of the video, my phone decided to give up and bid me goodbye, but in silence. So I was talking to the screen, unaware that my audio had completely gone a long time ago. My phone was dead, practically dead. I'm recording audio from my phone because I don't have a microphone set up yet. Now, this will be my voiceover of now what's happening after this to try and recover what I'd lost. Now, after setting up the selector, we set up the default route, of which in this case it will be /movies, because that's where clicking on our A selector will take us. The Oats will reference through the href for A tags, and for button navigations is what now usually is the default route strictly. And then we have the base active route, where this movies link selector should always be considered as active, any route that starts with /movies, and so we'll provide that. And then what we'll now do next is just save the file, run it, and then when we look at our app, navigate to movies, we should be able to see our movies fragment, and there it is. Our movies fragment is now part of the web app. Easy peasy. Might be a long concept to understand at first, but easy to catch on. And if you look at what Oats is doing in the background for us, you can see it's switching the navigation state attribute from between inactive and active based on which navigation link has been clicked on and should be the active one, as per what provided in the app main nav info. It doesn't do all the boilerplate for us. We literally have to do nothing on that end. And our navigation is working well. Navigation links are working well. You can also use the arrow buttons. Oats is using the history API to also render the right fragments based on that movement. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is default routes. Though I'd mentioned about default routes in the previous video when I was talking about how to start an Oats app. You can reference that video for something probably more in-depth, but here we'll just attempt to just replicate what we've done before, now using another practical example, not just the starter project. And let's say we wanted to have our app route from, instead of having the root path and movies, we'd instead want to have HTTP cards loaded from /HTTP cards route. Now we'd obviously have to update our routing info first. And go there where you had our root path and specify HTTP cards. And audio is back. Audio is back. It missed me for I don't know how long. My phone died, and I'm using it to record audio, so I didn't even notice. I will fix that. So coming back to the now just handling default routes. So in case we didn't want our web app to start at the root, what we'll do instead is we'll specify this as a new route. We just change what our route was. Root, we'd have it as /http cats. But the problem is if this attempts to reload, Oats will not know which route to start at because number one, there's an invalid route. You no longer have the root as a route. And in our index.js, we don't have a default route that we're supposed to start at. So we can just fix that by specifying HTTP paths. And then now, save that file. And then now Oats will be able to know that when we load from a route that is not specified in our routing info, like our route path, it will redirect, or rather force the route, change the route to the default route. And they can obviously just change this behavior by now specifying movies instead. And now it will load fine because HTTP cat is a valid route. We have that provided here. But if I'm to attempt to load, to get the page from the root path, and also attempts to render from the root path, that will fail, and instead it will default to the it will fall back to the default route, which you've now specified as movies. And you'll see that happen just like that. Now, we'll just default this to how it was previously. Right, and actually just leave this as the root path. And that will also have the advantage of we will load from the root path. That's fine. And if I want to load from a path that doesn't exist, Oats will be able to correct that and just start from our default route. So this comes in handy, not just specifying where you want users to start their experience with your Oats web app from, but also helps to avoid Oats getting confused about where it's supposed to start routing your web app in case once it loads from the once it loads on the client. Now just illustrate that by not providing a default path, then attempting again something not existent. You can see what it failed to route because it didn't have a fallback. You can just leave that as a root path and we'll always be safe. Always be safe. That's it for this lesson. You've managed to successfully set up an Oats fragment, not just one, but two. You've been able to set up routing for them. You've been able to set up main navigation info for them that allows allows you to automatically know which navigation link or button is active, to also be able to style them so that you can visually tell the user where they are, and also have Oats automatically handle the boilerplate for you of setting up the navigation links and actually navigating your web app. In the next lesson, we'll add reactivity. We'll now be able to load actual cat images when you click on Meow, load actual movies when you search for a movie, and I hope that bit will be fun. Until then, leave a like and subscribe if you want to support the work that we're doing here at Oats. Their support links also down there, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.